Chapter 27, Knights and Squires. Stubb was the second mate. He was a native of Cape Cod and hence, according to the local usage, was called a Cape Cod man. A happy-go-lucky, neither craven nor valiant, taking perils as they came with an indifferent air. And while engaged in the most imminent crisis of the chase, toiling away, calm and collected as a journeyman joiner engaged for the year. Good-humored, easy, and careless, he presided over his whale boat as if the most deadly encounter were but a dinner, and his crew all invited guests. He was as particular about the comfortable arrangement of his part of the boat as an old stage driver is about the snugness of his box. When close to the whale, in the very deathlock of the fight, he handled his unpitying lance coolly and offhandedly, as a whistling tinker his hammer. He would home over his old rigged-gad tunes while flank and flank with most the exasperated monster. Long usage had, for this Stubb, converted the jaws of death into an easy chair. What he thought of death itself there is no telling. Whether he ever thought of it at all might be a question, but if he ever did chance to cast his mind that way after a comfortable dinner, no doubt, like a good sailor, he took it to be a sort of call of the watch, to tumble aloft, and bestir themselves there about something which he would find out when he obeyed the order and not sooner. What, perhaps, with other things, made Stubb such an easy-going, unfearing man, so cheerfully trudging off with the burden of life in this world of grave peddlers, all bowed to the ground with their packs? What helped to bring the most impious good humor of his? That thing must have been his pipe. For, like his nose, his short, black little pipe was one of the regular features of his face. You would almost as soon have expected him to turn out of his bunk with without his nose as without his pipe. He kept a whole row of pipes there, ready loaded, stuck in a rack, with easy reach of his hand, and whenever he turned in, he smoked all of them out in succession, lighting one from the other to the end of the chapter, then loading them again to be in readiness anew. For when Stubb dressed, instead of first putting his legs into his trousers, he put his pipe into his mouth. I say this continual smoking must have been one cause, at least, of his peculiar disposition, for everyone knows that this earthly air, whether ashore or afloat, is terribly infected with the nameless miseries of numberless mortals who have died exhaling it. And in the time of the cholera, some people go about with camphorated handkerchiefs to their mouth. So, likewise, against all mortal tribulation, Stubb's tobacco smoke might have operated as a sort of disinfecting agent. The third mate was Flask, a native of Tisbury, in Martha's Vineyard. A short, stout, ruddy young fellow, very pugnacious concerning whales, who somehow seemed to think that the great leviathans had personally and hereditarily affronted him, and therefore it was a sort of point of honor with him to destroy them whenever he encountered. So utterly lost was he to all sense of reverence for the many marvels of their majestic bulk and mystic ways, and so dead to anything like an apprehension of any possible danger from encountering them, that in his poor opinion the wondrous whale was but a species of magnified mouse, or at least a water rat, requiring only a little circumvention and some small application of time and trouble in order to kill and boil. This ignorant, unconscious fearlessness of his made him little waggish in the matter of whales. He followed these fish for the fun of it, and a 3 years' voyage round Cape Horn was the only jolly joke that lasted that length of time. As a carpenter's nails are divided into wrought iron nails and cut nails, so mankind may be similarly divided. Little Flask was one of the wrought ones, made to clinch tight and last long. They called him King Post on board the Pequod, because, in form, he could be well likened to the short, square timber known by that name in Arctic whalers, and which, by the means of many radiating side timbers inserted into it, serves to brace the ship against the icy concussions of those battering seas. Now these three mates, Starbuck, Stubb, and Flask, were momentous men. They it was who by universal prescription commanded 3 of the Pequod's boats as headsmen. And the grand order of battle in which Captain Ahab would probably marshal his forces to descend on the whales, these 3 headsmen were his captains of companies, or, being armed with their long, keen whaling spears, they were as a picked trio of lancers, even as the harpooners were flingers of javelins. And since in this famous fishery each mate or headsman, like a Gothic knight of old, is always accompanied by his boat steerer or harpooner, who, in certain conjunctures, provides him with a fresh lance when the former one has been badly twisted, or elbowed in the assault, and moreover, as there generally subsists between the two a close intimacy and friendliness, it is therefore but meet in this place that we should set down who the Pequod's harpooners were, and to what headsman each of them belonged. First of all was Queequeg, whom Starbuck, his chief mate, had selected for his squire, but Queequeg is already known. Next was Tashteego, an unmixed Indian from Gayhead, the most westerly promontory of Martha's Vineyard, where there still exists the last remnant of a village of red men, which has long supplied the neighboring island of Nantucket with many of her most daring harpooners. In the fishery, they usually go by the generic name of Gayheaders. Tashteego's long, lean sable hair, his high cheekbones and black rounding eyes, for an Indian, Oriental in their largeness, but Antarctic in their glittering expression. All this sufficiently proclaimed him an inheritor of the unvitiated blood of those proud warrior hunters, who, in the quest for the great New England moose, had scoured, bone in hand, the aboriginal forests of the Maine. But no longer snuffing the trail of the wild beasts of the woodland, Tashteego now hunted in the wake of the great whales of the sea, the unerring harpoon of the son of fitly replacing the infallible arrow of the sires. To look at the tawny brawn of this lithe, snaky limbs, you would almost have credited the superstition of some of the earlier Puritans, and half believed this wild Indian to be the son of the prince of the powers of the air. Tashteego was Stubb, the second mate's squire. Third among the harpooners was Daggoo, a gigantic coal-black Negro savage with a lion-like tread, an Airhouses to behold. Suspended from his ears were two golden hoops so large that the sailors called them ring bolts, and would talk of securing the topsail halyards to them. In his youth, Daggoo had voluntarily shipped on board a whaler, lying in a lonely bay on his native coast, and never having been anywhere in the world but Africa, Nantucket, and the pagan harbors most frequented by whalemen, and having now led for many years the bold life of the fishery in the ships of the owners uncommonly heedful of what manner of men they shipped, Daggoo retained all his barbaric virtues, and erect as a giraffe, moved about the docks in all the pomp of 6'5" in his socks. There was a corporeal humility in looking up at him, and a white man standing before him seemed a white flag come to beg truce of a fortress. Curious to tell, this imperial Negro, Asaharius Daggoo, was the squire of Little Flask, who looked like a chessman beside him. For the residue of the Pequod's company, be it said that at the present day not 1 in 2 of the many thousand men before the mast employed in the American whale fishery are American-born, though pretty nearly all the officers are. Herein it is the same with the American whale fishery as with the American army and military and merchant navies, and the engineering forces employed in the construction of the American canals and railroads. The same, I say, because in all these cases the native American liberally provides the brains, the rest of the world is generously supplying the muscles. No small number of these whaling seamen belong to the Azores, where the outward-bound Nantucket whalers frequently touch to augment their crews from the hardy peasants of those rocky shores. In like manner, the Greenland whalers sailing out of Hull or London put in at the Shetland Islands to receive the full complement of their crew. Upon the passage homewards, they drop them off there again. How it is, there is no telling, but islanders seem to make the best whalemen. They were nearly all islanders in the Pequod. Isolatos, too, I call them such, not acknowledging the common continent of men, but each isolato living on a separate continent of his own. Yet now federated along one keel, what set these isolatos were, an anarchist Klutz deputization from all the isles of the sea and all the ends of the earth, accompanying old Ahab and the Pequod to lay the world's grievances before that bar from which not very many of them ever come back. Black little Pip, he never did. Oh, no. He went before, poor Alabama boy. On the grim Pequod's forecastle ye shall ever see him, beating his tambourine, prelusive of an eternal time, when, set for to the great quarter-deck on high, he was bid strike in with the angels, and beat his tambourine in glory, called a coward there, hailed a hero there. Called a coward here, hailed a hero there. So, that's the end of chapter 27. Now, this is a very mixed crew. You know, you had Queequeg, who's from the Pacific Islands. You have Tashteego, who is a Native American. You have the tall guy, who is African, and I've just skipped past Daggoo, Daggoo, who's 6'5". From the sound of it, broad-shouldered, just big. You know, I'm a big guy. But, you know, I don't have muscle. So, you know, someone who's, yay much taller than me, you know, an inch taller than me, taller than your dad, taller than your Uncle Derek, you know, 6'5", big guy, almost 2 meters tall, actually right around 2 meters tall, broad-shouldered, big, muscular, and it described him as looking like a fortress. There have been times where I've been almost considered to be a wall, where, you know, it's like, actually, there's a picture around someplace that I don't have of me standing in falling water, Frank Lloyd Wright's house, and I'm standing in a doorway. Now, when I say I'm standing in the doorway, my shoulders are touching, my head is touching, my feet are square in the corners. Actually, there's another one of me in the Nautilus where I'm sitting in the hatch, and my butt is firmly on the bottom of the hatch, and my head is touching the top of the hatch, and my shoulders don't even fit in the hatch. And so this is a guy who's even bigger, but he's burly and strong, not like me. So, and, you know, the story about him. Here he was a guy in Africa, just a guy, doing whatever he was doing, and he saw this whale ship, and just for giggles, he got on board the whale ship. Now, you have to consider, at this time, slavery was still a thing. Now, they'd stopped importing slaves from Africa, officially. There was some of that went along behind the backs, and there's a movie called Amistad about that, and there were still Africans being taken for slaves to other places. But here was this guy who just decided, I'm going to get on the ship with these white people and see where they go. And he's made a good career of it. Now, you'll see more about Pip later. Pip shows up later, and he's only mentioned here as, oh, he was so brave, but no one ever thought of him, and he's dead now. So, you know, that's kind of a bad introduction. I guess a lot of people, it happens occasionally where somebody gets introduced as they die, or get introduced as someone who is about to die. Now, looking at the people, you have Stubb. And, you know, I mentioned before, Starbuck was careful. And he didn't want to go with anybody who, you know, wasn't afraid. So that's one thing. Then you have Stubb, who knows the danger. It's like, okay, this is dangerous, but, you know, I know the danger. And he's just happy, and he smokes way, way too much. There's something called chain smoking, where you light the next cigarette off of the last one, and smoking is really, really bad, and don't do it. Anyway, chain smoking, where you light one cigarette off of the last one, and so people who chain smoke can just go through dozens, just light the next one, toss away the butt. Anyway, chain smoking, and Stubb does this with pipes, and I don't know. I've never smoked pipes. I never smoked, but he does the same thing with a pipe, where he lights one off of the last one. He goes through a whole row of them. And I can't imagine how much tobacco he must bring with him. For 3 years at sea, he's planning to go away for 3 years. And so figure each pipe takes, I don't know, a thimbleful. Call it a teaspoon. Takes maybe a teaspoon of tobacco. So he goes through a dozen a day. That works out to a quarter cup of tobacco a day times 1,000, 1,200 days out at sea. So a quarter cup times 1,000. Let's just make the math easy. Or actually times 1,200. Times 1,200. You know, quarter cup times 1,200. That makes the math really easy. 300 cups of tobacco. Now, so you have 300 cups. Okay, so 300 cups, that's 300 cups divided by 8, because, 8 cups, 2 cups in a quart, so that's 300 cups goes into 150 pints. 150 pints goes to 75 quarts. 75 quarts goes into, what is that, 17, something like that, 17 and a quarter gallons. So 17 gallons of tobacco, 18 gallons of tobacco, roundly speaking. So those big metal drums? He has essentially a third of one of those, the big 55-gallon drums, the bigger oil barrels. He essentially has a third of those full of tobacco that he needs to take with him in order to smoke like this.